Some of Australia's biggest companies announce job losses and face fines for underpayment of staff. The federal government introduces new rules to force car makers to reduce emissions. And there's finally some good news on airfares. It's Thursday, the 20th of April, 2023. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Too early on the woohoo, Michael?
Oh yeah, you do have a habit of going off early, Sean. That's that was quite a premature celebration, but it is a good story, and we'll get to that one a little bit later. You have an interview coming up after the show today with Lucy Darville, the head of Bain's Australia and New Zealand Healthcare and Life Sciences practice.
Yes, we talk all about the Australian healthcare sector, from hospitals to allied health to primary and secondary practitioners. I must say, I learnt a lot from this chat to Lucy, and we get into what's needed really to improve the healthcare. We have this great healthcare system. No one is debating that. But unless we perhaps apply some Band-Aids or even some more structural reform, then it ain't going to last. So we talked to Lucy all about that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation that's coming up later on. The main story this morning, though, Sean, some of Australia's biggest corporates have announced massive job layoffs, and others face big fines for underpaying staff.
It really was quite an amazing 24 hours or so in the world of employment relations, starting with gaming group The Star. The group has put its flagship Sydney casino up for review and will cut 500 jobs group-wide, cancel executive bonuses and freeze salaries. The company has also downgraded underlying earnings for this financial year, sending its share price 7% lower. Now, Star Group said there's been significant and rapid deterioration in operating conditions following damage inquiries in New South Wales and Queensland that found the company was unfit to hold a gaming licence. Falling discretionary spending is also hurting, hence they're out there cutting jobs. The group's underlying business is in trouble, and of course that's on top of the $100 million in fines from the inquiries, a potentially larger fine from AUSTRAC, 4 class actions, and the potential for an increase in the casino tax in New South Wales. This is a company that is really struggling.
Yeah, sure is. And there's also set to be job losses at Australia Post, Sean, with reports today that up to 400 roles will go as the postal carrier really looks to streamline its operations.
Basically, its letters business is losing money, and Aussie Post is heading for a full year loss this financial year. That would be the first time that's happened since about 2015. There are ongoing talks about upping the cost of stamps, reducing delivery frequency again, but in the meantime, it seems that there's going to be a bunch of job losses at Australia Post.
I actually feel a bit sorry for the people running Australia Post because it seems like one that would be very hard to get right. If you increase the cost of stamps, people complain. If you reduce the frequency of delivery, people complain. But they also can't continue to lose money.
Yeah, it's between a rock and a hard place. You say they can't continue to lose money. That's only half true. They can lose money if the government decides that it's worth losing money on Australia Post. Like, it's not necessarily, it is a corporatised entity, but the government can make a decision that delivering mail, and particularly older Australians who probably rely on Australia Post more, maybe it is worth running at a loss. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, its parcels business is booming.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not as though all parts of the business are declining.
Yeah, I mean, it's a legacy business because its model has been decimated by technology, and just like newspapers, just like records and things like that. And so it is changing. I think it's done a great job. To think that it's actually made a profit for the last 6 or 7 years is pretty impressive.
Yeah. And finally, Sean, the Commonwealth Bank has admitted to knowingly underpaying thousands of staff more than $16 million through mass use of individual agreements that actually undercut union agreements.
Yes, this is very interesting. The country's largest bank accepted allegations in the federal court that its senior managers were repeatedly on notice that workers were getting underpaid since 2010, but failed to fix the issue and even misled staff and the workplace umpire that it was complying with the law, and what it conceded was a decade of systematic conduct. That's according to a report in the Financial Review. The bank and its ComSec arm have admitted they collectively underpaid 7,402 employees $16.1 million from 2015 to 2021. Now, all have since been paid back with interest. It's Commonwealth Bank's admission that it knowingly or recklessly underpaid the workers, which has triggered some surprise. It's also opened the bank up to fines of up to $660,000 per breach under the Fair Work Act. The Fair Work Ombudsman's legal action against the Commonwealth Bank is one of the biggest underpayment cases the watchdog has taken on, next to Coles and Woolworths, and is a rare instance of a major corporation knowingly underpaying staff for years.
That has the potential to be huge, Sean. The potential for fines there, if it can be up to $660,000 per breach, and just even kind of assuming that allegedly 7,402 employees constituted one breach each, the calculator on my phone couldn't even figure that out. The number was too big.
That's right. What is it? It's $4 billion? Something like that?
Yeah, well, once I reach a certain point, it just starts flashing E, which means an error, which means it can't fit it on the screen, which probably means it's above
a lot of money.
Yeah, yes, indeed. That is, again, my attempt to do maths on the fly, and I have come up short once again. How did local markets respond yesterday, Sean?
Well, the S&P ASX 200 finished the day up just a touch, 5 points to 7,366 points. BHP and Rio Tinto led the way, rising 1.6% and 1.2% respectively. Diversified miners South 32, it jumped nearly 2%. Gold Digger Northern Star rose 1.5%. But if you move away from the miners, it really wasn't a great day. All the major banks were lower. The Macquarie Group was up slightly. Woodside and Santos, the energy giants, were lower. So too CSL, Wesfarmers, Woolworths. Telstra was one of the few large caps to end the day in positive territory. Overall, Lake Resources was the worst performer of the top 200, down 7.6%, while Telix Pharmaceutical was the best, jumping 5%.
And what about international markets?
Well, on Tuesday night, a couple of Fed officials talked up rate rises, and that put pressure on equity markets globally. Most of the regional bourses yesterday, including the Nikkei in Tokyo, the Hang Seng in Hong Kong, and the Shanghai Composite, were all trading lower. Not a lot to report in commodity markets, though. Iron ore prices pushed back above $125 a tonne, hence that performance of BHP and Rio Tinto. The Aussie dollar has also held on to gains. It's trading above 67 US cents this morning.
Hey, Sean.
Michael.
When I said that before about the $660,000 at and potentially 7,400 breaches, and you said it was somewhere like $4 billion.
Yeah.
Did you do that in your head?
Yeah. What's the number? Is it nowhere near that?
No, it's 4.8 billion.
Right. So it's 5 billion. So a long way off.
Oh, you're closer than me. I just knew that it had errors in my calculation, but I'm impressed. It suddenly dawned on me as you were talking, while you were talking about local markets, and I drifted off briefly, that you did that in your head. And I just thought, you know what? New nickname, Sean Calculailma.
Well, it's actually 660,000. It's just 2/3 of the big number, isn't it? That's all you got to do. So, in fact, to say 4 million, it's closer to 5 million, 4.8, as you said. So, in fact, I didn't do a very good job.
Oh, maths shortcuts. How about this?
Now, I've got to say, I grew up working at Woolworths in Orange. And it was a time when you actually had to calculate the change. So you didn't have something that would calculate it for yourself. And it has held me in good stead for years. And my kids still kind of have a go at me for being able to do maths in my head, which they, of course, just pull out their phone and do it. But it's because I worked at Woolies from the age of 14 to 18, and you had to give the change.
And if you kind of add together 4 halfpennies and kind of and a shilling.
Oh, Michael, let's move on.
All right. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, the federal government is set to introduce mandatory pollution caps for new cars as part of its national electric vehicle strategy.
Australia is one of the few developed countries that doesn't have fuel efficiency standards. Federal Climate Change and Energy Minister Chris Bowen yesterday announced new rules for all passenger vehicles, which currently generate about 10% of the greenhouse gas pollution from Australia. Fuel efficiency standards impose limits on average emissions from the overall fleet of vehicles sold into a market by a particular manufacturer. It kind of encourages them to sell more EVs, basically. Bowen said exact details will be developed after consulting with car markets. Australia is well and truly behind the 8 ball on this, and if we're to cut emissions by 43% by 2030, as the government has said, new rules on cars are needed. Bowen said new cars in Australia use 40% more fuel than those in the European Union. The UK, Japan, France and Germany have already promised to ban sales of internal combustion engines between 2025 and 2030. California in the US is doing the same from 2035. A lot of catching up to do, Michael.
Well, I actually picked this as the sleeper story. Something similar to this. Remember in the weekend edition from the weekend just gone, and I said, "Watch this space. There'll be more happening on EVs and emissions requirements in Australia in the very near future." I wasn't expecting it to be this soon, and I also didn't I just wanted to point out that I was right, Sean.
Yeah, well done. Congratulations. Did you win that particular round?
I actually did by some miracle.
Oh, well done.
Yeah, thank you. Just got to give myself a little plug there, because no one else will do it. So, in the latest opinion polls, show Peter Dutton and the coalition falling further behind the Albanese government, putting more pressure on the Liberal Party leader to change direction.
Labor has lifted its primary vote from 39% to 42% over the past month, with the coalition's share falling back to 28%, according to the Resolve strategic poll in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. In terms of preferred Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese is ahead 55% to 21%. Now, Dutton's personal approval rating has fallen to minus 28%. I don't know how you get an approval rating of minus. Anyway, it was minus 11% a month ago. It's now minus 28%. Definitely going the wrong direction. The worst result for him since he won the job after last year's election. Albanese's approval rating was up to plus 27%. Pretty good, though it's still below its highs reached over summer. The results come after weeks of debate over the voice referendum, also discussion about cost of living pressures. It just looks like the opposition isn't really getting much cut through on those issues.
Yeah, it seems that way. Now, Sean, the story that caused you to celebrate midway through the introduction to the show today, airfares between Australia and the US are set to fall after United Airlines said it'll increase the number of flights to Australia and New Zealand by 40% by year end.
More competition, Michael, lower prices. Don't we love that? The non-stop services will include new routes from Los Angeles to Brisbane and Auckland, as well as more flights from San Francisco to Brisbane and Sydney. Australian carriers are currently operating at around 70% of pre-COVID-19 capacity. When you get more players in the market, they're going to have to offer lower prices to try and attract us. Flight Centre Managing Director Graham Turner said the new United Airlines routes would definitely help cheapen flight costs. Turner told The Australian that fares will fall even more when Chinese carriers start coming back in a significant way. So, some good news for cheaper airfares, not just to the US, but also in the region towards the end of this year.
And speaking of cheap airfares, Sean, we have a fantastic story coming up a little bit later.
We do.
In the episode, so stick around for that. I love that one. A net zero Australia will require up to $9 trillion of capital to be spent on energy, industrial and export infrastructure by 2060, according to researchers.
Yes, now, of course, this is using current technology, but the numbers are eye-watering. Decarbonisation is forecast to provide 700,000 direct jobs, mainly in regional and rural areas, according to independent modelling released yesterday and reported on AAP. New export industries will be mainly in northern Australia, close to export markets, with significant production in the south, but access to land and water might be controversial. This is from research by Net Zero Australia. Now, Net Zero Australia is a business-sponsored research partnership between the University of Melbourne, University of Queensland, Princeton University and consultancy Nous Group. It says replacing coal generators and tripling power capacity by 2030 requires a more rapid rollout of wind and solar farms, transmission infrastructure and energy storage, and a greater uptake of electric cars and heat pumps. Renewables, mostly wind and solar, are the main energy source of the future, with offshore wind expected to make a significant contribution from around 2030. Still, $9 trillion of capital. A lot of money.
That is huge. And just before we leave the oil and gas sector, Sean, Woodside boss Meg O'Neill said the coalition's refusal to deal with the Labor government on the safeguard mechanism reforms left the way open for fringe elements to have a say.
She didn't miss yesterday. And in fact, her comments were somewhat similar to Kevin Gallagher, the chief executive of Santos, which of course is the main competitor to Woodside. O'Neill said it was a missed opportunity when the coalition was not prepared to negotiate on the legislation for industrial emissions reductions. And I quote, "For Australia to tackle climate change sustainably, it's got to be done in the centre and in a way that can endure regardless of who is in power. Otherwise, you ping-pong from government to government, playing to the fringes with outcomes that do not serve the Australian people well. I think she's 100% correct in that.
Actually makes a lot of sense. Finally, Sean, the Victorian Independent Broad-Based Anti-Corruption Commission released its Operation Daintree report yesterday after investigating the awarding of a contract in the lead up to the 2018 election.
The investigation said that a ministerial advisor working in the then Health Minister Jill Hennessy's office exerted pressure on Department of Health and Human Services staff to award the contract to a health workers union entity. It also found that an advisor in the office of a subsequent Health Minister, Jenny Mikakos, and an advisor in the office of Premier Daniel Andrews intruded into the department's management of the contract against the public interest. Now, Daniel Andrews himself responded, saying while IBAC's report found staff in his contract exerted pressure on health department officials to award a $1.2 million contract to a health union, no current members of Parliament were mentioned.
All right, turning to international news now, Sean, and it promised so much scandal and excitement, but in the end delivered really not much in terms of gossip fodder. Though Fox Corporation shareholders will certainly feel the pain, Fox yesterday settled a defamation lawsuit brought by Dominion Voting Systems, agreeing to pay $787.5 million US.
Don't forget the half. The settlement was announced by the two sides at the 11th hour. It was announced after a jury was selected. And of course, it avoids a high-profile trial that was supposed to include testimony from Rupert Murdoch. Dominion had sought $1.6 billion in damages in the lawsuit filed back in 2021. Now, at issue was whether Fox was liable for airing the false claims that Dominion's ballot counting machines were used to manipulate the 2020 US election, which of course Joe Biden won over Donald Trump. Dominion argued that these on-air claims caused the company enormous and irreparable economic harm. Dominion Chief Executive John Paulos called the settlement historic and said Fox had admitted to telling lies about his company. Fox, in a statement which was read on air, said, "We acknowledge the court's rulings finding certain claims about Dominion to be false. This settlement reflects Fox's continued commitment to the highest journalistic standards." I was so looking forward to this trial, Michael. And damn squid.
Oh, yes. You're bringing back your damp squibs. It would have been something else, wouldn't it, to see Rupert Murdoch and others and some of the Fox News hosts.
Sean Hannity and some of these guys. Would have been great.
Would have been tremendous theatre, so you can probably understand why Fox was keen to avoid that. Now, Netflix, Sean, is the world's leading streaming service, and the group got off to a bit of a slow start to the year, missing forecasts for customer growth, triggering a 12% drop in its share price.
Yes, now I like this story because really Netflix just leads the streaming industry, and so what happens there generally is happening everywhere else. Netflix added 1.75 million customers in the first quarter, much lower than expected, and said revenue and profits will be lower. The company's also delayed its plan to crack down on password sharing in the US. Now, this is the second year in a row, Michael, where Netflix has gotten off to a poor start. Shares of Netflix are down about 50% from their high of November 2021. Last year, Netflix added fewer than 9 million customers for the full 12 months. That's its slowest pace since 2011. That was the year it split its streaming service from its DVD by mail business. Did you know that DVD by mail business, until yesterday, was still operating? In fact, it's probably still operating, but yesterday, Netflix announced it's finally shutting down its DVD delivery operation after 25 years.
I didn't know that. I obviously knew its background, but I didn't realise it never occurred to me that it would still be operating.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, there you go. Sean, this is the story that I'm hanging out for. I know you love the Netflix story, but this is the one that I think is great. I mentioned the airfares before. Japan's ANA Holdings has said that it will honour $10,000 business class tickets that were sold for just a few $100s after a currency conversion blunder.
For example, Jakarta, Singapore, Tokyo, New York, Tokyo, Jakarta tickets, normally worth about $10,000 were shown as costing $300. Jakarta, Tokyo, New York was $350. Now, people who saw the mistake and jumped on the website and booked will actually get tickets at that price. So if they paid, they get the tickets. If they only reserve them, then they'll have to pay full price. According to Bloomberg, ANA said the mistake stemmed from an error on its Vietnamese website, which listed an erroneous currency conversion. It didn't state how many people had secured discount tickets and added it was currently investigating the cause of the bug and the size of its damage, but clearly it was a significant number. Now, when these prices went up, some of the online forums around the place actually started spreading the news, meaning people did jump on and take advantage of it.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah, it sure is.
It's like winning the airfare lottery, isn't it?
It is, very much.
Now, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview with Lucy Darville, the head of Bain's Australia and New Zealand Healthcare and Life Sciences practice.
Yep, all about what needs to be done in the Australian healthcare sector, and that's plenty.
Yeah, it's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Don't forget to check out as well the new episode of How Do They Afford That, which is our sister podcast. It came out yesterday featuring me and Canna Campbell talking about a whole bunch of different ways to get your grocery bill back under control. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Thursday, the 20th of April, 2023. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and stay up to date on all the business news with Alexa and your Amazon Echo smart speaker. Simply say, Alexa, play the Fear and Greed podcast to catch the latest episode. You can grab yours now at amazon.com.au. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.